companies. Thank you. Recording is in progress. Just to let everyone know, she is with the law firm of Epstein Becker, and we welcome her. And I'm going to actually turn it over to Lynn for a more detailed introduction. And I might ask you, as part of that introduction, Lynn, to tell us how you got into healthcare and tell us a little bit about your career journey as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity for me to address all of you. I have a passion for helping women be leaders in business and in getting women on corporate boards. I grew up in Morristown, New Jersey. This is not a New York accent. And my family had a pharmacy right on the town square. And when Medicare was passed in 1965, they started renting a wheelchair hospital bed. And they decided when they saw supermarkets carrying drugstores to open a full-line durable medical equipment home care company. So we had a distant relative in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, who invited us and gave us, he had a mall. He gave us 2 years free rent. And the next thing I know, in my junior year of high school, I'm with 2,800 Mennonites. I I skipped my senior year of high school and went to Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster. They were kind enough to accept me. And I did even the summer, so I finished that in 3 years, but I spent my time studying health economics. There were a lot of pre-meds there. I did a paper on HMOs, paper on Medicare. Everything was coming out of Washington, D.C. This is 1973, 74, 75, 6 time period. So I was lucky. I got into GW Law School. My parents told me everything's coming out of DC. Go be a health lawyer, whatever that meant. It's everything but malpractice, in case you want to know what it is. It's the business side of healthcare. And I grew up in the business. So I found this guy, Stephen Epstein, who was setting up IPA model HMOs under the HMO Act that gave seed money to nonprofits to inject competition into the health insurance indemnity market. I said, well, I don't want to be a lunch lawyer in Washington, so I better do articles and bylaws and contracts for a couple of years. So I'll go to a law firm for like 2 years, and then I'll go to a trade association and really make a difference. I had no idea. I was so green. I had no idea that you could represent a trade association in a law firm. So one of the key anchor clients was the IPA Model HMO Trade Association. So for the first 15 years of my career at Epstein Becker, I got to do day-to-day counseling, learning how to set up these managed care companies. And I got to do policy to change the laws because the laws never match reality. It's a constant, I tell people I operate between policy, law, and the real world. And it's a constant cycle to make sure things can work and you can be in compliance. And then I got married. Then I had 3 kids. And you wake up one morning and you say to yourself, where can I go to continue to grow professionally? And I was already at the firm, one of the managing partners at a very early stage in my career. And we are a super boutique. We only do healthcare, life science, and employment law. And I just celebrated my 45th anniversary at the firm. I have a lot of Epstein Becker clothing. See, we were at the annual meeting. Some of the older ones, we were comparing notes of when we got this shirt or that shirt at which conference. So, but I don't know what got into me, but I was determined to find a women's group that could support me because now I'm like running a business, a law firm. Nothing in law school taught me how to do that. I learned more from my family's pharmacy than I did from going to law school. And of course, I watched how Stephen Epstein had done it. He also came from a business family. So I went to all these women's groups that existed. Either the women were too senior and there was no focus on healthcare, or it was healthcare, but it was only this piece of the healthcare industry or that piece, or the junior women were in the room. Where do you go when you're already the boss to continue to grow professionally? So I had just had a bar mitzvah of my second child. I said, oh, I could throw a party. Once a year, I'll throw a party. I'll get the whole industry in the room. How novel is that? And I got a little carried away. So I created a 501c3. It's called WBL. See, I'm wearing my little WBL tag today. And we're called Women Business Leaders of the U.S. Healthcare Industry Foundation because I'm a literal lawyer. I have no creativity that way. And I went ahead and created WBL. And our mission is twofold: to have a place where the whole healthcare life science industry talks to each other. Because I tell the men talking is our golf. Like that's how we play golf. We talk. And then to increase our visibility to be on corporate boards, because my male clients, I would criticize them and say, how come there are no women on the
Right.
board? Like, why am I the only woman in this room? And after a while, a couple of men said to me, okay, Lynn, who can you recommend? And that's when I had that light bulb moment where I said, I could really make a difference, but I need to know more Lynn Snyders. And I created a database, cold called 60 women, 40 said yes, 35 showed up. And in 2026, we're going to have our 25th anniversary of WBL. We have 1,400 members, 9 full-time employees. We have a place where the healthcare life science industry really talks to each other, supports each other, and increases the visibility to serve on corporate boards. And I'm very
That
gratified because I'm the customer. I'm a
That's
consumer.
fabulous. I mean, that's dedication, and I have to tell you, I got connected to Lynn when I was organizing the healthcare private equity panel and was looking for senior women to be on that panel, which is not easy to find. And one of my private equity friends said, "Oh, the only person you need to contact is Lynn. She can guide you." And 100%, the one person she had recommended to, well, two actually, one I'd already gotten on the panel, and the other one I was debating. And Lynn said, "Oh, she'll be fabulous. Don't worry about it." And sure enough, she was. So Lynn is very well connected, and I really appreciate the dedication that you're showing to help women. So that's why we're here, is to really understand your experience and how you see the current context, and that can help. Again, we're also a similar organization in that we are all about helping women in their professional and personal careers. So let me just start with, you've been on several boards as well, and several different kinds of boards. So there are, startup advisory boards, there are startup boards, there's private equity, there's public, there's corporation, midsize, all of that. Give us your experience of the boards. And by the way, for the group that's on, I'm only going to ask 2 or 3 questions of Lynn, and then we're going to open it up for conversation, because I think it makes more sense to get this interaction going. So Lynn, give us a sense of your board experience. We know it's hard to get on board, so maybe we can defer that conversation to kind of its own topic, but the kinds of boards you've been on and the kinds of issues that those types of boards face in healthcare and life sciences, I think would be particularly interesting.
Sure. So first of all, I did have a little advantage being a lawyer because part of my practice, I defended companies that are being investigated for healthcare fraud. So I'd be in the boardroom trying to explain to the board and senior management why they got to roll over, write a big check, and sign a corporate integrity agreement. And so I was already familiar with those dynamics, but that's as outside counsel. The first board I got on was Epstein-Becker's board. And I was I think I was the first woman on the board of the firm. And it matters who's in the room. Your perspective can really make a difference. and how you handle yourself before the meeting, during the meeting, after the meeting. I can tell you our law firm is one of the best places for women to work, and I will take credit for that. And it wasn't that the men were against anything. It wasn't even on their radar screen. So that was my first board experience. And when I created WBL, of course, I created a board for myself. Because if you create your own corporation, somebody has to sit on that board. That's a not-for-profit 501c3. And I am the chair, which is a different role that you play, where you have to drive the governance process and not just show up at a meeting or be on a committee. And then as a result of that, I've had to decide the size of WBL's board. When do I invite more people in? We created a subcommittee for compensation to judge the executive director, who's now the CEO, because she really is a CEO more than an executive director. So as a result of, there's a company that takes healthcare companies to a foreign country for 1 week to study the healthcare system. And we're the exclusive law firm on the trip. So I go on a trip to Argentina, and there's a man on the trip, and he's the chairman of the board of Trustmark Mutual Insurance Company in Lake Forest, Illinois, a 100-year-old company that sells voluntary benefits, had one of the largest TPAs of health insurance claims, and a wellness division. And he's talking to me during the whole trip. At the end of the trip, he tells me confidentially that the board member, he has a board member who's retiring, who's a lawyer. He likes to have lawyers on there, at least one lawyer on the board, and would like me to consider it. I had no idea I was being interviewed during the whole trip, right? So I said to him, I want to be ecumenical. I really want to make sure that you're casting the widest net. I'm happy to be considered, but would you use my WBL Foundation? Because we take opportunities. You fill out a form, it could be anonymous, and the women self-select if it's something they're interested in. He said, okay, let's do that. And they also hired a search firm. Almost 2 years later, I eventually got selected. And at the 11th hour, it was between me and a man who was an Illinois resident, because they do prefer Illinois residents for mutuality. You have to have a minimum of 3. And I checked off 4 boxes. First of all, a woman. I also was the lawyer. I also was inside the Beltway. And this is before Obamacare. And they were trying to decide strategically what they want to do about being a healthcare company or just a life insurance company. And then the 4th thing is I had my other board work, and they could see that I had familiarity with board work. So when I joined the board, I was the youngest. And most of the men on the board, I was the only woman for the first 12 years. I've been on this board for 18 years. Now I'm the oldest. I've lived through 3 CEOs. I've been on every single committee: compensation, investment, governance, and audit. I'm always on audit. One of my women friends said, if you really want to know what's going on in a company, insist on being on audit committee, because it's the best way. Follow the money. So I was very content with that board seat until one thing. WBL, we started doing a board ready program rather than just a summit. And so I got on the board. I've been mentoring women, and I've been telling them, you really have to ask. I was lucky I met a guy on a bus in Argentina, but you have to be more strategic. You can't just put your resume in a database at a search firm and expect them to do your homework for you. And I had just had the first annual board program where I said that to the audience. I was embarrassed to go to the board program the next year and not do it myself. So I got a mirror and I practiced 100 times asking for myself. And I called a guy at Blackstone who was in charge of Apria, which is the largest DME store company in the country. Been a client for many, many years, but I don't do the work on a day-to-day basis. I called Neil up and I said, Neil, of all the places where I think I could provide value, I think I would like to be considered for the Apria board. And not just answer legal questions. And he was so polite. He said, "Thank you so much for your time." And I thought he was blowing me off. And like 6 weeks later, he calls back, "Oh, Lynn, I didn't want you to join by yourself. I got two guys from DJO. You already know them. Let's fix this company. And the markets are hot. And by the way, there's this little government investigation I forgot to tell you about, right?" And so I had to manage that for a while. I got on the board. We went public during COVID. And
Wow.
he had me chair a brand new committee of the board called the Compliance Committee of the board, separate from audit. Enterprise risk, that goes to my strength as a lawyer. I understand enterprise risk. And one of my enterprise risks was to hire the right law firm to get rid of that Southern District of New York thing, sign a itty bitty CIA, make sure the right law firm was hired for that. But I didn't practice law. So that was my second. But then we went public and Owens and Minor found us and they took my board seat away because I had an exit. So I exit and then the phone rings. A former Blackstone person is over at General Atlantic Private Equity. And he has a physical therapy company he just bought. And he saw what I had done for Apria and he asked me to create the compliance committee of that board, which I'm doing right now. And
Right.
that's my other board seat. So I have the Apria, I'm not on anymore. So I just do PT Solutions. I do Trustmark and WBL. And this January, I stepped down from the Epstein Becker board after
Gotcha.
20 years
Gotcha.
on that. But they're all
And
different.
yeah, they're different. And of course, the commonality, which we all know, is that once you get on the first, it's easier to get on a second and third. But the interesting thing was, I mean, you serendipitously happened to meet the board chair of your first company, and yet it took 2 years to get on the board. So, I think that's just something for all of us to kind of keep in mind that it is very much a long process. What would you say are some of for healthcare, in particular healthcare life sciences, what would you say are the skill sets or functional heads that boards are looking for? I know most boards do kind of a matrix of board members and skill sets that they need,
You
but
would
what do you
think,
see?
right? You would think they would do that. They don't always do that.
Okay.
To be on the board is about trust and relationship more than it
Mhm.
is expertise. And I will tell you that you've got to work backwards from your skill sets. They can hire a lawyer, they can hire a financial person, they can hire a marketing person. But why would Trustmark want a lawyer on the board, and why would they want a chief information officer? Because our chairman of the board right now is the former CIO of McDonald's restaurants. In those days, to have a CIO was unheard of on the board, right? Everyone had to be a former CEO with P&L responsibility.
Mm.
What they are interested in is a rock star and value add. So figure out if you're a rock star in something and figure out your value add. And I advise women, particularly women, to work backwards. Pick two or three companies where you know that you would be reviewed as a rock star and you have a value add. And then figure out who you know there or 1 degree of separation. And then ask, because there was no opening for Apria. There was no advertisement for Apria.
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah,
know what he was up to.
yeah,
And he might have said, it's great. And then 3 years later, he would have thought of me. But it doesn't come automatically that when they look at somebody who looks like me, that is one of my career objectives. And
right.
that's the default that women have to overcome, which is it's easier for a man. Most people in the board are men, and the people who invite you in are going to be mostly men. And they see other men in the room. So the fact they don't see people who look like us, it's they have to either know you or have 1 degree of separation confidence in you. And even in my trust mark where I met the guy and everything, he called Stephen Epstein.
Of course. Of
to
course. Yeah,
find out if I was, you know, who he
yeah,
thought I was.
right. Well, I know there are a lot of questions, so anyone who has a question, maybe get ready. But I'm going to ask one more before I open it up and help us understand the way compensation works for a private equity board versus a public board, the range of cash versus equity, sort of expectations, et cetera, and even sort of how it grows or doesn't with tenure.
So let's start. Well, there are certain boards like WBL where you pay for the privilege. You make a charitable donation, and the money goes from you to them. And there are advantages. First of all, the reward of giving back, and also the opportunity to connect with other people on the board. And they may be on for-profit boards that may at a later time
Sure.
become relevant to
Mhm.
you. On the Trustmark board, it's a mutuality. So the policyholders are the shareholders. So there's no stock. They do have like a phantom stock for employees. And then so the board gets a retainer. Uh, and there are publicly available um, uh, books around where they, like National Association of Corporate Directors, that'll tell you, it could be 50,000 to 200,000, something like that. In the old days, they used to pay per meeting, per phone call, and they got away from that. And they just do an annual retainer. And the compensation committee of the board not only looks at compensation for CEO and the C-suite, but every couple of years we go back in and hire a third-party consultant to tell us whether our compensation for the board service is we like to be a little bit to the lower side of the median. We don't have to be the top. We don't want to be the bottom. And each board decides where you want to be on the spectrum of payment. So that's just an annual payment. On the private equity side, they'll tell you what the compensation is because they'll be in one situation, it was both stock that has to vest over time as well as an annual retainer. And they did have monthly meetings. It was a time commitment. The other one is more quarterly. And the first thing the guy said to me was, and we don't pay a retainer. So it could be worth nothing over all the years, right? Or it could be something, but you get vested stock that way. I will tell you the advisory board role is one of the best ways to get your foot in the door because I'll warn you, you really have to be careful which company you give your reputation to. And first, if I hadn't known Apria, their Medicare receivable is a big part of they were one of the few DME companies had never had a CIA because I know the people in their reimbursement arm are very excellent people, but you have to be careful which companies you're going to put your brand to. So it's just very advisory boards can be a retainer, but a lot of startups don't have the cash. So they'll give you equity. I've gotten equity in an advisory board capacity, and I can show you the files I just shredded from some of those opportunities when I finally sold my house to downsize because nothing ever came of it.
Right.
But that's okay. I learned from the meetings I had. I got to meet people that I would not have otherwise have known. And I
Yep.
got to be better at selecting which startups might really take off and which ones to avoid.
That's great. So, questions from the audience. Anyone want to start?
Well, I have a question, but I also just have an add on to that comment also, just because I had the same conversation about uh, with a mentor of mine as it related to compensation. So I'll add on to that just so that people, and if anybody else has any other data points, I'd love to hear them too, because I was asking the same question. Um, I'm in the market for potential board seats in advisory. And so I had a mentor and I went to him and I was like, well, what should I ask for, or what's market? And he came back to me and he said, like, look, somebody came to him and they had a very interesting structure. And so I don't feel like I'm giving away anything because it's not something that I gave, it's something that they gave to him. So something that they gave to a white dude. So really interesting for us to hear. And this particular firm, this was in the context of a private equity firm that was still in the pre-investment phase. So they hadn't yet
Bought the
uh,
company.
bought the company, and the person would be investigating, like kind of doing due diligence alongside the firm. And so there was both an advisory fee, so like an hour, it could be hourly, it could be weekly, it could be monthly, kind of a different kind of a retainer fee there. And then there was a kind of like a bounty if the deal was signed. And then there would be the opportunity for a board seat once the deal was signed, with then both the annual and equity thereafter. So when you think about kind of what's the full arc that's available, like that's kind of really the full arc that was available. What then was really interesting was that with that fee, just to give you guys a sense, because I thought that this was really interesting, but in the context of legal work, it's kind of nothing. It was like, but from like a layman person who'd never charged by the hour, it was like, I think they were kind of like, okay, we'll pay you like $1,000 an hour for a 10-hour day, and so it's just as to be really transparent to this group, and so I think that, like, when you think about then what is the opportunity for a fractional piece of what you could be doing to put together some of the pieces that you might want to do. I don't know, I thought that was like a really good data point to consider, or at least to throw out there and see, like, are the people that you're working with, oftentimes if it's like you're dealing with a private equity firm versus at that point the private equity firm is paying, not the company. So you have two different pools of money also that are paying for the piece. That was really interesting. But anyway, so I'll stop. But my question for you was, have you considered public company versus private?
Yes. So Apria was private when I joined the Apria board, and then we went public on NASDAQ while I was on the board. So I actually got to be part of that process to go public, which is a great experience. And then within 60 days or 90 days, Owens and Minor showed up because they could see our financials. And they had bought a diabetes and a wound care mail order direct to consumer. They're mostly a wholesaler, and they wanted the rest of the DME. So they came and gave us an offer that was really very attractive. So that's why I was only on a public company board for less than a year. But the issue of private versus public, for most people, the opportunity is to be on a private board. And one of the best things could be that it becomes public while you go from private to public. If you, it's much harder, more competitive. A public board is more likely to use a search firm and do, even though the people on the board usually give them the candidates that they prefer, and they still prefer to go through a search firm, but less than a third of those seats even do they use a search firm. And so it's much harder. The caliber of person they're looking for are more likely to be former politicians or former CEOs of companies. And they really put a lot more value on the CEO and less on a lawyer or a CIO. Your better opportunities would be private. But as I said, you just never know. There could be a publicly traded company maybe not on New York Stock Exchange, but on NASDAQ, that might really fit the bill. And you'll have more access to information because it's public before you make your overture of who to ask and what to ask. I would also, Amy, I'll comment, doing the diligence is a great opportunity because sometimes they'll buy a company that you decide you don't want to be on the board of.
Yeah, that's a great.
You're
that's a
able
great-
to go under the hood before you're even like
Yeah.
married.
I like that analogy.
Thank
Anybody,
you.
Sherry, you had a question, I think.
Hi there.
Maybe
First of
Gabby
all,
after
this
her.
is, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, great, 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 great. Thank you so much. This is wonderful, and what a wonderful conversation, and really appreciate your just transparency and helping us. So I have a question. You mentioned about, who do you attach your brand to? Who do you connect with? What can you give us some criteria or guidelines on what you evaluate to determine whether this is the right kind of company for you or not? Secondly, what is, can you do a due diligence to determine whether you want to hitch your wagon to this company? Because I'm coming from a private equity background where I do due diligence for our companies. But if I'm being asked, which right now I am being asked to join as an advisor to a company, how much can I ask to see, is it acceptable, as a due diligence before you decide, yes, I want to be an advisor for this company,
Oh,
to ask for certain pieces of information, and what would be those pieces of information you would ask for?
very good question. So do you know anyone at the other company where you're being asked to be an advisor? How did they find you, or is it more a LinkedIn cold call?
No, somebody I know who referred me. They knew me and they referred me to the CEO of this company.
So the first thing is to get to know the CEO. The CEO is such an important relationship, and to make sure you have mutual respect. And then, do you know anybody else who knows that CEO to circle your wagon, like to figure out that? And is the CEO also the chair of the board? Yeah. Oh, you're on the, you can stay off mute for a little
Okay,
bit.
there we go. Yes, I think so. I think he
Okay.
is. I think it's free money. I'm not quite sure. I'm just getting to know it.
Okay, because one of the things you can ask is, would he mind if you just spoke to one or two of the other board members to find out a little bit more about the company? And it doesn't have to be that you're not sure he's credible or whatever. It's all about your time. That's how I position it. I have a choice. I have a granddaughter and I have a grandson already. I can spend my time with them or be on a corporate board. And I say to them, before I give away my time, I just want to know that it's a meeting I want to be in. And that's not about them. It's about you. And he's going to want to woo you. All right. He's going to want, there's a reason why they think you would be attractive. There's something about your past experience and your, I'll call it a Rolodex. I don't know what you call it these days, but we used to call it a Rolodex.
Yeah.
The people who are in your network that provide the value add. I can't emphasize enough how I underappreciated the value of having a network and to be able to one of our mottos of WBL, and if you remember WBL, everybody owns the network. It's not like my network, but no such thing as a cold call in healthcare. If I need access to somebody at Pfizer, I at least have one person from Pfizer I can email and say, hi, I see you're a member of WBL. This is my issue. Could you just help me get to the right person? And our culture is they better respond or you report them to me. And then I go after them because the least you could do is respond. I'm not into ghosting. Otherwise, don't join WBL if it's only about you. So if we don't help each other, shame on us. So I think you should treat it, not that you're concerned about them, which you are, but you're trying to make a very important decision because you have to go to your current PE firm and get consent to make sure they don't think it's a conflict, correct? Right,
Right.
right, because
Mhm.
they own your time. Just like I
Mhm.
have to go to Epstein Becker every
Mhm.
time I give away another chunk of time, and they have to
Mhm.
decide whether they're going to keep Lynn happy or not. They're lucky I'm
Mhm.
still working, right?
Mhm.
So I'm just telling you that there are ways to find out more about whether this is where I want to put my brand. And then there's more now than there was years ago. But then also you you do have to be a risk taker. And women are historically less risk taking than men. And so you may find out that there's junk there.
Yeah.
When you find the junk, do not leave. That is the best time for you to make a difference and fix it.
Yes.
That's
But
a great
Lynn,
point. You know, interestingly, Sherry, I was advising another oncology company, and I almost and loved the CEO, everything, very early stage. And I was like, well, I could be I should be on the advisory board. And then I talked to a friend, and she said, I think this company's going to get your credibility by having you as a strategic advisor. And you really need to think about, do you want to put your credibility on this company? And it really was a great piece of advice because I was just thinking, hey, I want to do this and this will be a stepping stone, you know, to the next one. And so I really agree with Lynn on not just the time aspect, but your credibility aspect. Do you want your credibility to be attached to this specific
exactly. Well, thank you. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys about it. You know, I'm used to doing due diligence for my regular PE firm. My question is, this is coming from left field from another place. How much can I look at as a due diligence before I assign my name to it? What's
Yeah.
appropriate?
Oh, Janiki, is that it? You
John
had
Key.
a, pardon me? I want to pronounce
John
her name.
Key. I think it's
Janki?
John Key. Yeah.
I just want to answer your question about a non-disclosure agreement. Anything you can do to avoid signing anything is better, period, end of story. If you are going to sign one, it has to have the real traditional, and now with ChatGPT, you can find a million of these, but it should say anything that you knew before you signed it, you have the right to own that. There's no record of what you knew before. So you're going to have an argument over that at a later time. So if there's anything you know that overlaps with the company, create a contemporaneous document before you sign the NDA, a memo to yourself, send it by email that says, these are the things I already know. So you have a record of what you already know that's specific to that widget or that CPT code or that product, or you say, I knew everything about Bristol Myers product X, and you're asking me about, you know, AstraZeneca product Y. And if you have to carve that out or put it in the NDA, you make it explicit in the NDA. But you have to represent yourself to, or get a lawyer to help you sign the NDA. It is not an insignificant document, and it could tie you up for years.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Go ahead, Gabby.
You know, yeah, that's a fantastic point because I think we're bringing so much to the table that at times we don't realize if we've had decades of experience. I just recently had an opportunity to become an advisor of a startup, and this is why I was bringing some of the startup opportunities. I come from a very strong healthcare background as a physician and having been in different spaces within healthcare, but there's so many opportunities in the digital side. And one of the things that attracted me to this advisory board was that they were really offering me equity and they were not asking me for money, which is something that's happening so frequently, right, these days. And I was impressed with the track record that this person had in several of their startups. as well as their patents and things like that. But by the end of the day, going a little bit back to what Sherry was addressing, sometimes you really don't know for a fact that they're 100% legit. And the other part that I think is interesting, being women, and that's why I wanted to ask you, Lynn, about this. I tend to be very straightforward, and I'm pretty direct with everything that I say, and that is sometimes a catch-22, particularly in a group of in boards where men are used to being that way, but they may not be used to having women on their board being that way. So any suggestions? That I've been on boards and I aspire to be on boards. I'm going to actually be a part of there's a Women on Boards program at Harvard starting in December. So I'm going to be having additional training in the area. But my point is, do you have any gems that you could share with us about stylistic issues that become?
It's very important. The style is just as, I always tell people 50% is the content, and then 50% you got to push the pause button and decide who I'm going to say it to, how am I going to say it, what time of the day I'm going to say it, do I do it by email, do I pick up the phone, do I put it in writing or not? Especially as a lawyer, I can't tell you how many times I say to the associates, pick up the phone, I don't want that in writing in an email. Oh, but it's attorney-client privilege. I don't care. I don't want to write something to a client that they're behind on a deadline and that they should have, done something already. So I'll give you a word of wisdom that I learned from one of my board services, because as you can tell, I am very direct. And I think my directness has been both an asset and a liability. They'll hire a lawyer who's very direct. They may not want to sit next to them in a board meeting. So one of my chairs, they were doing an evaluation. Everybody does a self-evaluation, and then they meet with you to see if what everyone else said about you matches your self-evaluation. And some of the men that are on the board, I was on the board with, they hadn't been at work for years. They had never had email at their day job. I mean, they were, older. And they thought I talked too much. They thought I was too loud. They had comments like that. And the chair, he was so wonderful. He said, Lynn, can you just ask them about their grandchildren? Just think about that. Just try and have a personal relationship with everybody on the board. Don't just come in and be work, work, work. You don't have to prove yourself anymore. You're in the room. Sit next to them. Don't just sit next to the team. Ask them to show you pictures. I mean, and I got the best evaluations after that.
Great tip. Really great tip. I mean, Gabby, please.
That was amazing. Thank you. I mean, everything that you've said, Lynn, has been amazing. And I think that that's one of the toughest things for women who feel confident and, they have quite a bit of experience. They're coming in with great intentions. We may have been good at what we do for being very focused and not distracted with other things. And I think there's also maybe a generational issue too, where I trained as a psychiatrist. As a psychiatrist, I would have never revealed anything on a personal level, but younger psychiatrists tend to reveal everything about themselves, even if they've struggled with mental health issues and other things. So the generations have been quite different, but this is super helpful. Thank you, Lynn, for sharing those gems.
Michelle.
Oh, well, thank you, Lynn, for your time and expertise, and thank you, Jagruti, for organizing and leading the Healthcare Roundtable. So I would love to hear, given the importance of networking in terms of identifying potential board opportunities or advisory opportunities, and also doing due diligence once you've found them, I'd love to hear how you grew, it was WBL to 1,400 members, because it sounds like a powerful like networking and engagement story. Just if you could briefly summarize. We might
Sure.
get
I don't have a marketing budget at all.
Mhm.
I had I had a paralegal go through all the SEC Edgar filings and pull out who were the women on the corporate boards of publicly traded companies, and then who were in the executive suite. We had just started email, but it wasn't a lot of email, so I was faxing a lot of stuff to people. And I had a database of 200 names. By the way, the number one woman on a corporate board 25 years ago of a healthcare company was the dean of a nursing school.
Oh,
I mean, think about it. The men couldn't find us. In fact, that's one of my mottos also. The guy once said to me, "Oh, Lynn, to find a woman is like a needle in a haystack for our board." And I said, "Okay, I'm going to create a haystack of needles." And that's what I did. I created a haystack of the one, and I reach out to a lot of men to ask them for a recommendation of who they would recommend to be in WBL. And every man had one woman, and she was great. And I took that one woman, right? But we had to be better to be equal. We had to be better to be accepted. And so I started with the 200. I reached out to 60. 40 said yes, 35 show up, take a picture. And then I said, if you want this network to grow, it's up to all of us. So for the first 10 years, we had no dues. I'd read Modern Healthcare magazine, and next thing you know, I'd sign up all these women to WBL. They didn't even know that they had joined because I was making them join for themselves. Like
oh,
I
you're
was,
such an entrepreneur, Lynn. That's
I
exactly what
just
entrepreneurs do.
I just said, I wrote them a letter, welcome to WBL. And then at our 10th anniversary, I had two generations chairing our strategic planning committee. What should we do? The women are asking for more services. Like it costs money to have a part-time this, a part-time that, volunteer this. Yeah, at the first summit, my secretary and my daughter were the registration table. Like I had no money, and I didn't want to do it on a nickel budget. So what I did was I had corporate sponsorships from that 35 group, and I tucked away a couple $100,000 from each of the summits with the corporate sponsorship and free labor for a couple of years before I really got more emboldened. So at the 10th anniversary, they came back and were arguing with me. We have to charge them dues. We had over 3,300 names. We need an engaged group. It's quality, not quantity. So we dropped down to 900. And then we still have the old list, and we reach out to them every once in a while if they're still around, if they want to be interested in some of our events. But now we're up to 1,400 paid, engaged members. And with each round, we were only doing an annual summit. Then we did regional breakfasts. Then we did webinars when we were doing that before COVID, but then we really cranked up with much more virtuality. Women don't like to travel. They have other commitments. And so we have a mixture of then we did the board program. We saw NACD was doing it. I said, our board program is not about how to be a board member. It's just about the value proposition and networking.
Oh.
You're more likely to get a board opportunity from the woman sitting next to you or on the Zoom next to you in the WBL board program than from any speaker or anything, because over half of our women now who come to the board program are already on at least one corporate board, and we're shopping for who else to pull through. I got one of my WBL women on the APRIA board about 3 months before we went public, and then she was selected to stay on the Owens and Minor board. So she's now on a New York Stock Exchange board because of her APRIA legacy board position. So, and you just got to do it one woman at a time. And we kept the fees. Our annual is $595 a year for the dues, and you can choose how much you want to be engaged or not. But Every woman is told in WBL to nominate the right senior woman to WBL. We don't want to have to turn people away who are too junior, but we will. And we don't advertise. We have men who are male champions. We have companies that have signed up 75 of their, United Healthcare signed up 75 of their leading women to be members of WBL. And so it's been a labor of love. And people say, where did I find the time? Because I had two older kids, 12 and 10, and I went and had a third. I had a second family with the first husband.
Wow.
And so I have now 39, 38, and a 28-year-old. And he was 4 years old when I started WPL. And I just felt like I had the resources, the desire. I wanted a place where I would be in the audience and not be the speaker. And I have that community that supports me. And it made me take more risks than I never would have taken as many risks as I have in my career, but for the fact that I heard stories from other women that said, oh, they did that. Oh, I'm going to try that.
So we have just about 3 minutes left, and I want to be very respectful of Lynn's time. So are there any other questions? I love the fact that Lynn has shared her experience as opposed to giving us a lecture on, how to do it, which is the way I think that's quality. That's exactly quality, is sharing experiences, and we take away what we want from it. But are there any other questions? If nobody has Deborah, do you have a question? I don't know if you had unmuted, so I thought maybe you might have a question.
Yes, I did, but quickly it was had more to do with the things to look out for when it's a smaller board. It doesn't have to be a startup, but even an emerging company where there's less information available, et cetera. And as you mentioned, you're more likely to be offered equity.
It's less formal. They may not even have board meetings as often as you would like. And you may be the only independent director, but then you have a role to play, and you have to say to them, the reason why I'm an independent director is to create accountability for the board. We also see that with family-owned companies. There is a whole group of family-owned companies. NACD has like a whole chain of family-owned companies and how to get on those boards. But you have to be willing to tolerate that imperfection and for the excitement of helping a company get from point A to point B in sophistication. So it's just a matter of your risk tolerance.
Great, sure.
Great answer.
And I like your point about being an independent board member, because I've been on nonprofit boards where it's clear that they don't really want to criticize the chair, it's this and so you have to be careful about how you say, well, I think this would be better. I think you'd get more out of this or that. And you sort of notice what that dynamic is once you start.
Also, you have to know when and where to criticize. It's very important to criticize the CEO outside of the board meeting and not inside the board meeting. So much has to happen before the meetings even start. And one of my chairs was having a meeting with me after every meeting, like 2 weeks later, to say what happened, help me on board a little bit. And the other board members found out, and they all wanted it. And it was so funny. Even the older board members wanted the benefit of that. So, but you have to do your homework, the political homework, before you walk into that boardroom. That's not the place where you have as much confrontation. If there's a major disagreement, you want that aired out before the board meeting, or at least to know that it'll be managed during the board meeting and the right people are there. So.
Lynn, advice. Thank you.
Any other questions? Maybe a final one for me. And
Just 1 second.
Oops. The question I was going to ask was how to parlay a not-for-profit board role, because I've heard mixed messages. So Lynn, my question is how to parlay a not-for-profit board role in a for-profit context, because I've heard mixed messages. I've heard in some sessions, they say
Oh,
that's great, and in others, they're like, it's completely irrelevant. So help us with that
yeah,
question.
you join a nonprofit because you have a passion for what the nonprofit does, and because you want to have the opportunity to work with the other people on the board. The way it could be leveraged is twofold. The experience you have, you'll be on comp committee, you'll be on audit committee. That committee work is the same, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit. But then the second thing is the relationships that you find. It may not be the board members, it could be the executive team, it could be vendors that are selling to that nonprofit who find out about you, and the next thing you know, they say, "Oh, your stuff." So that's all about networking, the networking angle to it, and that's up to you to decide. And I did want to mention the 2 books. Is that okay?
Yes, please. We have a
So
gift from
yeah,
Lynn.
we have a gift, which is at the first summit, we did a survey, how come we made it and other women's didn't make it? And we came up in plenary session with the top 10 reasons for best practices for advancing women in business. And then a few years later, they asked me to make like a little vignette for each one. I made a little paperback book. The first half is the advancement of your career, 10 best practices. The second half is how to get on the board radar screen. So then they said we need to know, we have to tell the men that we're interested in board service. So I created a second book called Answering the Call, Duties, Risks, and Rewards of Corporate Governance. And it's for men and women. Why should a busy exec want to be on a board? What are the duties? What are the risks? What are the risk management? What's D&O insurance? So it's on its 4th edition. And I have a broker of D&O that writes that chapter. I had Deloitte write the chapter on audit committee. It's an airplane read. So on the 4th edition, and I got it updated after Dobbs. So the 4th edition is mostly board. Then there's a chapter on why diversity matters in group decision making and all the studies that show. And then it has a section on getting on the board radar screen. So some of the content in the first book is in that 4th edition, but I have them as PDFs. We give them away for free as a way of promoting WBL, and we give it to men and women. And sometimes I present at companies, women leadership councils, and we give the books away. So you're all going to get the book, and you're all free to give the book to 2 PDFs. You can give them to whoever you want and direct them to the WBL homepage. You can self-nominate if you think you're eligible. You can recommend WBL to other people, and you can get the benefit of the content in the books.
Thank you so much. It's so generous of you, and really appreciate that. And I think with that, I know I share everyone's sentiments to thank Lynn for her time and these insight tips. And let's stay in touch, Lynn. I'd just love to learn more as as time goes by. So really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet all of you. Have a great rest of your day.
And thank you to everyone for joining. Take care.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Jagruti,
Thank
for
you.
organizing. Thank you, Lynn. Wonderful.
Bye-bye.
Great
Bye.
job. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.